The big house was quiet. Too quiet. Mrs. Eleanor sat at the long wooden table, staring at her toast. She didn't want to eat it. She never wanted to eat anymore. Across from her, Mr. Richard read his newspaper, the pages making soft crinkle sounds in the silence. They didn't talk. They hadn't really talked in years. "Are you ready?" Mr. Richard finally asked, folding his newspaper with sharp, angry movements. "Yes," Mrs. Eleanor whispered. That was all they said. 2 words. 2 people who once loved each other so much, now sitting like strangers. They walked to their shiny black car. It was expensive. Everything they owned was expensive. Their house had 12 rooms. Their garden had a fountain with stone angels. Their closets were full of beautiful clothes. But none of it made them happy. Mr. Richard started the car. Mrs. Eleanor looked out the window as they drove through the city. She saw children playing in the park, holding their parents' hands. A little boy dropped his ice cream, and his mother hugged him, saying it was okay. Mrs. Eleanor felt something twist inside her chest, like a hand squeezing her heart. She turned away. They drove for 20 minutes without speaking. The radio was off. The only sound was the hum of the engine and the whoosh of other cars passing by. Finally, they reached the cemetery gates. The iron gates were tall and black, with curling decorations that looked like sleeping snakes. Mr. Richard parked the car under a big oak tree. Its branches spread out like arms trying to hug the sky. They got out slowly. Mrs. Eleanor carried white flowers, roses and lilies. They were her son's favorites. At least they used to be. It had been so long. She sometimes wondered if she remembered correctly. They walked along the stone path. Their footsteps echoed in quiet. All around them were graves, gray stones with names and dates carved deep into the rock. Some had fresh flowers. Some had nothing but weeds. Mrs. Eleanor counted the steps. 42 steps from the gate to their special place. She always counted. It gave her something to do besides think. They stopped at a small grave under a willow tree. The stone was clean and shiny. Mr. Richard paid someone to keep it that way. The stone said, "Beloved son, gone but not forgotten." But that was a lie, wasn't it? They had forgotten. Not his face, not his name, but who he really was. They had forgotten to love him when he needed it most. Mrs. Eleanor knelt down. Her knees hurt. She was getting old, but she didn't care. She placed the flowers gently on the grave. "Hello, sweetheart," she whispered. "We're here again." Mr. Richard stood behind her, stiff as a statue. His hands were in his pockets. His jaw was tight. He never cried. Not anymore. He had used up all his tears years ago, or maybe he just locked them away somewhere deep inside. "It's been another week," Mrs. Eleanor continued, talking to the stone. "The roses in the garden bloomed. You always loved roses. Remember when you were 6 and you tried to pick one for me, but you got thorns in your finger? You cried and cried, and Her voice broke. Mr. Richard cleared his throat. "We should go. We have that dinner meeting at 7. Just a few more minutes," Mrs. Eleanor begged. But Mr. Richard was already walking away. He couldn't stand it here. The guilt was too heavy. It sat on his shoulders like a giant invisible monster, crushing him. He had been so proud, so stubborn. When their son had wanted to marry a girl they didn't approve of, Mr. Richard had said terrible things. "If you marry her, you're no son of mine," he had shouted. "You'll get nothing from us." Nothing. Their son had married her anyway, and Mr. Richard had kept his word. He cut him off completely. No money, no phone calls, no visits. Mrs. Eleanor had wanted to reach out, to call, to say she was sorry, but Mr. Richard wouldn't let her. "He made his choice," he had said coldly. "Now he has to live with it." But their son hadn't lived with it, not for long. 2 years after the wedding, the police had come to their door. There had been an accident, a car crash. Their son and his wife, both gone. Mrs. Eleanor had screamed and screamed. Mr. Richard had stood frozen, his face white as paper. And now, every week, they came to this grave, this empty grave. Because what else could they do? You can't apologize to the dead. Mr. Richard walked back toward the car, but something made him stop. A sound, wheels squeaking on the stone path. He turned around. A man in a wheelchair was rolling slowly toward them. His clothes were dirty and torn. His hair was long and tangled. His face was covered with a scraggly beard. He looked like he hadn't eaten a real meal in months. He was a beggar. The cemetery had them sometimes. People with nowhere else to go, looking for a quiet place to rest. Mr. Richard frowned. He reached into his pocket for some money. He would give a man a few bills and send him away. That's what he always did with beggars. But the man in the wheelchair didn't ask for money. Instead, he rolled closer and closer. Mrs. Eleanor stood up from the grave, wiping her eyes. She saw the beggar and gasped. The man stopped right in front of them. His hands were shaking on the wheelchair's wheels. His eyes, deep brown eyes, sad and tired, looked up at them, and then he spoke. His voice was rough, like he hadn't used it in a long time, but the words came out clear and strong. Mother, Father, I'm alive. The world stopped. Mrs. Eleanor's flowers fell from her hands, scattering on the ground like white and pink snow. Mr. Richard's face went completely pale. His mouth opened, but no sound came out. The beggar in the wheelchair stared at them with those brown eyes, and Mrs. Eleanor suddenly saw it. The shape of his face, the curve of his nose, the way his eyebrows lifted when he was scared. "No," she whispered. "No, it can't be." But deep in her heart, she knew. She knew those eyes. She had kissed those eyes goodnight 1,000 times when he was a baby. "It's me," the man said, and a single tear rolled down his dirty cheek. "It's really me." Mrs. Eleanor's legs went weak. She stumbled backward, and Mr. Richard caught her arm without thinking. For the first time in years, they touched each other. "This is impossible," Mr. Richard said, his voice shaking. "Our son is dead. The police told us. They identified the bodies. We had a funeral." The man in the wheelchair looked down at his broken legs. "The police made a mistake," he said quietly. "My wife, she died, but I didn't. I was in the hospital for months. No one knew who I was at first. My face was hurt badly. By the time I could talk again, by the time I could tell them my name, the funeral was already over." Mrs. Eleanor moved closer. Her hand reached out, trembling like a leaf in the wind. She touched his face, rough with dirt and scars, but still her son's face. "Thomas," she whispered, "is it really you?" The man nodded. Fresh tears made clean tracks down his dirty cheeks. "Yes, Mama, it's me." That word, Mama, broke something inside her. She hadn't heard it in so many years. Mrs. Eleanor fell to her knees and wrapped her arms around him. She didn't care that his clothes were filthy. She didn't care that he smelled like the streets. She held him tight, like she should have held him all those years ago when he needed her. "My baby," she sobbed. "My baby boy. I thought you were dead. I thought I'd never see you again." Thomas hugged her back, his thin arms weak, but trying so hard to hold on. "I'm here," he whispered. "I'm here." Mr. Richard stood frozen. His brain couldn't accept what his eyes were seeing. This couldn't be Thomas. Thomas had been strong and healthy. This man was broken, thin as a skeleton, sitting in a wheelchair. But those eyes, those were his son's eyes. "Why didn't you come home?" Mr. Richard's voice came out harsh, angry. It was easier to be angry than to feel the guilt eating him alive. "If you survived, why didn't you find us? Why did you let us think you were dead?" Thomas looked up at his father. There was no anger in his face, only sadness. "I tried, Father. When I got out of the hospital, I had nothing. No money, no home. My legs didn't work anymore. I went to our old house, but the guard at the gate, he didn't recognize me. I looked different. The accident changed my face. When I told him who I was, he laughed. He said Mr. and Mrs. Richardson's son was dead and buried." Mrs. Eleanor gasped. "Oh, God. Oh, God." We were right there. "You were so close." "I tried to call," Thomas continued, "but your number had changed. I went to your office. Father, but your secretary wouldn't let me in. She thought I was just another beggar trying to trick my way into money. I kept trying for months, but nobody believed me. So what did you do? Mrs. Eleanor asked, still holding his hands. Thomas looked away, shame coloring his face. I survived. I begged on street corners. I slept in shelters. Sometimes I slept outside. My wheelchair broke twice, and I crawled on the ground until someone helped me get a new one. I ate from trash cans when I had to. I did what I had to do to stay alive. Mr. Richard felt something crack inside his chest. His son, his only son, had been crawling on the ground, eating garbage, while he and Eleanor lived in their mansion, eating fancy dinners they didn't even want. Why did you come here? Mr. Richard asked, his voice barely a whisper now. To the cemetery? Thomas smiled, but it was the saddest smile in the world. Because I knew you'd come. I've been watching for weeks. Every Sunday. You come here at 10 in the morning. You stay for 15 minutes. Then you leave. I wanted to approach you so many times. But I was scared. Scared you'd think I was crazy. Scared you'd turn away. Scared that even if you believed me, you still wouldn't want me. Why would you think that? Mrs. Eleanor cried. Thomas looked at his father. Because before the accident, you told me you had no son. You said I was dead to you. I thought maybe you'd be happier if I really was dead. Those words hit Mr. Richard like bullets. Each one tore through him, ripping open wounds he had tried to hide for years. He remembered that day. He remembered his son standing in their living room, holding the hand of the girl he loved. She wasn't rich. She wasn't from their social class. She worked in a coffee shop. Father, mother, I want you to meet Sarah, Thomas had said, his face glowing with happiness. We're getting married. And Mr. Richard had exploded. Married? To a waitress? Absolutely not. I didn't work my whole life building this fortune, so you could throw it away on some poor girl. Thomas had stood taller. I love her, Father, and I'm marrying her whether you approve or not. Then you're no son of mine. Mr. Richard had shouted, Get out! Get out and never come back. Mrs. Eleanor had tried to stop it. Richard, please, he's our son. Not anymore, Mr. Richard had said coldly. From this moment, we have no son. And Thomas had left. He had packed a bag and walked out the door. Mrs. Eleanor had watched from the window, crying, but Mr. Richard had stood firm. His pride was bigger than his love. Now, standing in the cemetery, looking at what his pride had cost him, Mr. Richard felt his knees go weak. I was wrong, he said. The words came out strangled, like they were fighting their way out his throat. God help me, I was so wrong. Thomas looked up, surprised. Mr. Richard's eyes filled with tears. For the first time in years, he let himself cry. I killed you, he sobbed. With my pride and my stupid rules, I killed my own son. I made you leave. I refused to help you. And when I heard you died, I wanted to die too. The guilt was so heavy I couldn't breathe. But I told myself it was too late. I told myself there was nothing I could do. I came here every week and put flowers on an empty grave because it was easier than admitting I had destroyed my own family. He fell to his knees in front of the wheelchair. This proud man, this millionaire who never bowed to anyone, knelt in the dirt and looked up at his broken son. Please, Mr. Richard begged. Please forgive me. I don't deserve it. I know I don't. But please, let me be your father again. Let me fix this. Thomas stared at him. Then, slowly, he reached out his thin hand and touched his father's face. I forgive you, Thomas whispered. I forgave you a long time ago, Father. I was just waiting for you to forgive yourself. Mr. Richard grabbed his son's hand and pressed it to his wet face. He cried like a child, all the years of guilt pouring out of him. Mrs. Eleanor wrapped her arms around both of them, and for the first time in so long, they felt like a family again. People walking through the cemetery stopped and stared. They saw a rich old couple kneeling in the dirt, holding a beggar in a wheelchair, all of them crying. But it wasn't sad crying anymore. It was the kind of crying that happens when something broken finally starts to heal. Come home, Mrs. Eleanor whispered. Please, Thomas, come home with us. Thomas looked at the grave marker, the stone that said he was dead, and then looked at his parents. "Okay," he said, smiling through his tears. "Okay, Mama, take me home." Mr. Richard stood up quickly. His knees hurt, but he didn't care. He looked at the wheelchair, old and rusty, with one wheel that squeaked loudly. "We need to get you out of here," he said. "We need to get you home. Now." He started pushing the wheelchair toward the car, but Thomas grabbed the wheels to stop him. "Father, wait," Thomas said. "I need to say something first." Mr. Richard stopped. His hands were still gripping the wheelchair handles. Thomas looked back at the grave with his name on it. "For years, I thought that stone was right. I thought the part of me that was your son really did die that day you told me to leave. I became someone else. Someone who ate scraps and slept on cold streets. Someone who people looked away from like I was invisible." His voice got stronger. "But I never stopped being your son, even when I had nothing. Even when I was so hungry my stomach hurt for days. Even when it rained and I had nowhere to go. I would see fathers and sons walking together, and I would remember you teaching me to ride a bike. I would remember Sunday breakfast and how you used to read me stories before bed." Mrs. Eleanor covered her mouth, crying softly. "I survived because I remembered I was loved once," Thomas said. "And I prayed, that maybe someday I could be loved again." Mr. Richard knelt down one more time, looking his son straight in the eyes. "You are loved. You never stopped being loved. I was just too proud and too stupid to show it. But that ends today. Today, we become a family again." He stood and pushed the wheelchair toward the car with new purpose. Mrs. Eleanor walked beside them, her hand resting gently on Thomas's shoulder, like she was afraid he might disappear as she let go. When they reached the car, Mr. Richard faced a problem. The wheelchair was too big to fit in the trunk, and Thomas couldn't walk. "I can lift you," Mr. Richard said. Thomas shook his head. "Father, you're too old. You'll hurt yourself." "I'm your father," Mr. Richard said firmly, "and I'm strong enough to carry my son." He bent down and carefully lifted Thomas from the wheelchair. His son was so light, too light. It made Mr. Richard's heart ache. Thomas should have been healthy and strong. Instead, years of hunger and hardship had left him fragile. But Mr. Richard held him tight and gently placed him in the back seat. Mrs. Eleanor climbed in beside Thomas, immediately wrapping her arm around him. Mr. Richard folded the wheelchair and managed to squeeze it into the trunk. Then he got in the driver's seat. For a moment, nobody spoke. They just sat there, breathing, realizing this was real. Then Mr. Richard started the car. As they drove away from the cemetery, Thomas watched through the rear window. He saw the grave getting smaller and smaller until it disappeared. "That person is gone now," he whispered. "The dead Thomas. He can stay buried." "Yes," Mrs. Eleanor said, squeezing his hand. "You're alive. You're here. You're coming home." The drive back was different from the drive there. This time they talked. "Tell us everything," Mrs. Eleanor said. "Where did you go after you left the hospital?" Thomas took a deep breath. "At first, I stayed in a shelter for people with disabilities. But there were rules. You could only stay for 30 days. Then you had to leave. I moved from shelter to shelter for the first year. But some nights, there wasn't room, and I had to sleep outside." "Outside?" Mr. Richard's voice cracked. "In the winter?" "Sometimes," Thomas admitted. "I found places under bridges or doorways of closed shops. Other homeless people helped me. They shared food when they had it. They protected me when dangerous people came around. They became my family when I thought I had none." Mrs. Eleanor's tears fell silently. She thought about all those cold nights when she had been in her warm bed, in her enormous house, while her son was sleeping under a bridge. "What about food?" she asked. "Begging, mostly." Thomas said, "I would sit on busy corners with a cup. Some people gave money. Most people walked past without looking. You learn quickly that when you're in a wheelchair, when you're dirty, people don't see you as human anymore. You become invisible." Mr. Richard's hands gripped the steering wheel, so hard his knuckles turned white. "I'm so sorry," he whispered. "I'm so sorry." I also ate at soup kitchens, Thomas continued. There's one run by a church 3 blocks from your office. Father, I used to eat there on Thursdays. Sometimes I would see your building from a window and wonder if you were in there working. We were so close, but we might as well have been on different planets. The car grew quiet except the sound of the engine and Mrs. Eleanor's soft crying. Why didn't you hate us? She asked. After everything we did, or didn't do, why didn't you hate us? Thomas smiled sadly. I tried to. It would have been easier. But hate is heavy, Mama, and I was already carrying too much weight. So I decided to forgive you instead, even if you never knew it. Forgiveness made me lighter. It kept me from becoming bitter. Mr. Richard had to pull the car over. He couldn't see through his tears anymore. He put his head on the steering wheel and sobbed, deep, painful sobs that shook his whole body. Thomas reached forward and put his hand on his father's shoulder. It's okay, Father. We're together now. That's all that matters. They sat there on the side of the road for several minutes, all of them crying, all of them releasing years of pain. Finally, Mr. Richard wiped his eyes, took a deep breath, and started driving again. When they pulled up to the big house with the iron gates, Thomas stared in amazement. I forgot how big it was, he whispered. The guard at the gate started to approach the car suspiciously, probably wondering why they had a beggar with them. But Mr. Richard rolled down his window and said loudly, Open the gates! My son is coming home. The guard's eyes went wide with shock, but he quickly opened the gates. As they drove up the long driveway, Mrs. Eleanor said, Your room is exactly how you left it. I couldn't bear to change anything. I dusted it every week, hoping somehow you'd come back. When they stopped in front of the house, Mr. Richard got out and carefully lifted Thomas again. This time, he carried him up the front steps. The same steps Thomas had walked down years ago when he left with nothing but a suitcase and a broken heart. Mrs. Eleanor ran ahead and opened the door wide. Mr. Richard carried his son over the threshold, just like a groom carries a bride. Welcome home, son, he said, his voice thick with emotion. Inside, everything looked the same. The chandeliers still sparkled. The floors still shined. But now it felt different. The house had been like a museum for years, beautiful but dead. Now, with Thomas inside, it felt alive again. Mr. Richard carried him to the living room and gently set him on the big, soft couch. Mrs. Eleanor immediately brought pillows and a warm blanket. Are you hungry? She asked. Thirsty? What do you need? Thomas laughed, a real, genuine laugh. Everything sounds good, Mama, but maybe just some water first. She rushed to get it, and Mr. Richard sat beside his son. Tomorrow we'll get you to the best doctors, Mr. Richard said. We'll see if there's anything they can do for your legs. And even if there isn't, we'll get you a proper wheelchair, the best one money can buy. And we'll... Father, Thomas interrupted gently. Slow down. We have time now. We have all the time in the world. Mr. Richard nodded, smiling through fresh tears. You're right. We have time. Mrs. Eleanor returned with water and watched Thomas drink it slowly, like it was the most delicious thing he'd ever tasted. Maybe after years of drinking from public fountains, it was, I'm going to make you a feast, she announced. Everything you used to love. Roasted chicken, mashed potatoes, apple pie. Mama, Thomas said softly, just having you here is the feast. Just being home is enough. She sat on his other side, and they stayed like that, the three of them on the couch, close together, making up for all the years they'd been apart. Outside, the sun began to set, painting the sky orange and pink. The big house, which had been silent and sad for so long, was filled with voices again, laughter again, love again. Mr. Richard looked at his son, dirty, thin, broken, but alive and home, and realized something important. His money hadn't saved his family. His pride had almost destroyed it. But love, forgiveness, and humility had brought them back together. I'm never letting you go again, Mr. Richard said firmly. Never. Whatever you need, wherever you want to go, I'll be right there. We'll be right there. I know, Thomas said, leaning his head on his father's shoulder. I'm home now. Finally, truly home. And in that moment, The big house stopped being just a building full of expensive things. It became what was always meant to be, a home where a family who had been lost found each other again. If this story touched your heart, please like this video, share it with someone who needs to hear about forgiveness and second chances, and subscribe for more emotional stories that remind us what truly matters in life. Don't forget to hit the notification bell so you never miss a story. Thank you for reading, and remember, it's never too late to come home.